everybody. On behalf of the Highland Park Public Library, we'd like to welcome you to Library in Your Living Room. We are pleased to present Shelf Isolation, a weekly mini-series about books, culture, and what to read next. I'm Sarah, and this is your Information and Reader Services Department. In this episode, we are excited to share with you what we've been reading, watching, and or listening to during self-isolation. To begin our mini-series, I'm going to turn things over to Readers Roundtable expert and moderator, Michelle.
Thanks, Sarah. So the first thing that I finished reading this week was Death on the Nile by Agatha Christie, which is a Hercule Poirot novel. Poirot goes on a trip down the Nile, and on the ship he meets the beautiful Lynette Doyle, and she approaches him and hey, I have this friend and she's kind of hounding and stalking me. I was wondering if maybe you could make her go away. Poirot was like, no, not really. So it turns out that this friend was a former love of her current fiance, Simon Doyle. Later in the book, Poirot does talk to the girl, her name is Jacqueline, and she kind of makes this huge show how she hates Lynette and she wishes that she could kill her. But then later, of course, Lynette ends up being dead. But at that time, everyone knows where Jacqueline was. So who was really the person that murdered her? In true Agatha Christie style, she has a huge cast of people with their own things going on. And of course, the plot twist at the end that I never can figure out. It's a really great book. It's really short. So of course, if you love Agatha Christie, I do recommend Death on the Nile. Secondly, I've been catching up on the new Digimon Adventure series. It started this year. It is the 6th in the Digimon series, and this is a reboot of the original 1999 series, which I loved. It takes place in the year 2020. There's been a series of cyber attacks across Tokyo and within the internet, which is the digital world. A group of 7 kids that were getting ready for summer camp are sucked into the digital world where they have devices called Digivices, and they get Digimon partners who they help evolve into different Digimon. They, of course, have to save our world and the digital world. This is a really great reboot. I loved the original series. It does have the same general plot line, but I do feel that the storyline is a bit tighter than the old one, and I feel like the character development is even better. I'm watching it on Hulu. It's currently being simulcast, which means you can watch it in Japanese with English subtitles as soon as they air it in Japan. Right now it's episode 18. You can also watch it on Crunchyroll. Either if you have the paid, then you can watch the new episode right away. Otherwise, if you want to watch it for free, you just have to wait for the new one to come out. So I do highly recommend the new Digimon Adventures if you loved the original series like I did. And that's all I'm going to talk about today. So I'm going to pass it over to Katie.
Thanks, Michelle. So I have 2 books to talk about today. The first one I wanted to talk about is Hench. So I got this as a advanced reader's copy, and I'm never giving it back because I love it too much. The back won me over with this first blurb. It says, a smart, imaginative, and evocative novel of love, betrayal, revenge, and redemption, filled with razor-sharp wit and affection, in which a young woman discovers the greatest superpower, for good or for ill, is a properly executed spreadsheet. Now, with a blurb like that, there is absolutely no way you can go wrong. And this book went all kinds of right. There is a girl named Anna. She is really good at entering data into spreadsheets, but she does this for evil people. She works as a henchman, which is brilliant. I love these stories that are kind of like, hey, here's all these things that work in like all these stories. Of course, all these villains have these supervillain companies, but I love the stories that are like, okay, they have these supervillain companies. Who's working for these companies? Who's doing the data entry and the HR stuff and like making sure that everybody's getting the vegetarian meals in the cafeteria? It's fantastic. And this really kind of dives into it. Like there's a whole like hench person temp agency that she works for, which is a major plot point. There are specific like taxi people who will only work with henchmen because they pay better, even though sometimes you have to have somebody bleeding in the back of your car. I mean, things happen. It's kind of a brutal book. She gets injured by a superhero. It's not spoiling anything. That's on the back of the book cover. And she goes into it in a bunch of detail. They talk about all the pins that they have to put into her leg. If that's not your kind of thing, that's probably not your kind of book because it does get a little bit more brutal from there. But I really like this book. The main superhero is called Super Collider and the main supervillain called Leviathan. And as you can tell from a person with super in their name whose villain starts with an L, it's kind of a Superman Lex Luthor kind of battle, except like the good guys really just have better PR. And that's kind of this whole thing that she gets into. She makes this spreadsheet that totals all of the property damage that Super Collider, this guy who injured her, gets into, and how many life years he's taking away from people. And she edits this spreadsheet and comes to the attention of Leviathan, who offers her a job in his company. It's fascinating. It talks about how Leviathan's company is structured, and he's always wearing this weird armor, and who's this guy under this armor. So there's a lot of subthreads going on there. So it ends up being the state-sanctioned superheroes against this Leviathan-owned company. This magnificent tech company is going against the state. Don't let this Elon Musk read this book. It's really kind of aimed at millennials because the whole thing starts off with her being insecure in her job because she's in a temp agency. She doesn't know where she's going to get her health care. She breaks her leg. She has to stay in somebody's apartment because her other complex was not handicapped accessible. Maybe it's not so much like Elon Musk versus the government, or like masked Elon Musk versus the government, but like reality of millennials with this fantasy of stability. But I really liked it. If you like The Shape of Water, or you're like really into monsters being redeemed, this is super up your alley. And I really liked it because the way that Anna takes down superheroes is through the internet and like soft power. She starts Twitter threads about things. She figures out secrets by comparing receipts to things. Her power is really just in information and her smarts, which is really nice because the superpower genre has kind of taken over, but this is really like anybody can be a superhero or a supervillain. You just need to have dedication and attention to detail. My second book this week is Piranesi. I did not get a pronunciation guide along with the book. This is a brand new book by Susanna Clarke. She came out with Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell about 15 years ago, which is a fantastic book, but it is a doorstopper. It's like 500 something pages. This, as you can see, is a very thin book. Just about breaks 250. It really zips along for the whole ride. So everybody in the reviews has been kind of comparing this to her last book, and I'm going to do the same thing because you really kind of have to talk about them together. She wrote a doorstopper before, but this is just a quick little jaunt. But really, like once I finished this book, I had to sit there for a couple minutes and deal with the ending. Susanna has this way of writing things where it feels like there's a whole world that you just kind of dropped into, and like there's all these secrets and all this knowledge. And she has like planned everything out and you've only seen one slice and you're like, but what else happened? You have to tell me. So that's kind of how this book ended, and it was fantastic. Really short, it's kind of lyrical, told in this journal entry format. We're actually reading the journal of Piranesi as the story continues. And he lives in this place called the House. And the house has oceans and birds and tides, and it never ends. He goes through something like 500, 900 rooms east and tells us about that room. It's like a magical labyrinth made of neoclassical architecture. Right from the beginning, you're sucked in and you're like, what is this place? Tell me how this place got here. It does tell you how this place got here, but you're not really going to expect it. So I really like it. It's just a quick little jaunt. And if you don't like it, it's only 250 pages. Those are my books this week. I will now turn it over to Gus.
All right. Thank you, Katie. So this week, not a lot of reading, but I did do one. And I highly recommend this one. I know it's October, scary month, right? Halloween, but I did not pick a scary one. I know you guys were thinking I was, but I did not. I picked a thriller. It sounded really good, and it was recommended to me. It is called Blacktop Wasteland by S.A. Cosby. It's a thriller, and I'm a few chapters in. It's really, really good. I highly recommend it. Like a high-energy thriller. It's really good. It's about a guy, his name is Beauregard, aka Bug, that's what they call him. And he used to be, I want to say kind of like a bad guy, but he knew that, that life wasn't good for him and it wouldn't lead to any future. So he tries to live a straight life, trying to be good. He's a husband, hardworking dad and all that stuff. But he's also a really good getaway driver. So it ends up being like a jewelry store heist that he gets sucked back in. He has no choice but to get back in. And I don't want to ruin anything, but it's really, really good. It was recommended to me on audio. I didn't listen to the audio, but from what I hear, it's really, really good on audio. I've been reading it. And I also want to listen to it because I think on audio would be awesome. So, and I could really picture something like this as a movie, which I wouldn't be surprised if they do make it into a movie. That's what I've been reading, Blacktop Wasteland. Awesome, awesome book. And I also have been playing games, but very little. So what better way to play anything than one of my all-time favorite games on one of my all-time favorite systems? Well, you guessed it, Tetris. Tetris Ultimate. Okay, this came out for the 3DS. It's a really, really good rendition of Tetris. There's another one called Tetris Axis that came out for the 3DS. It's really good as well. With all these new systems coming out, I like to go to things that people aren't really looking at right now. And the 3DS is one of my all-time favorite systems. Just the system alone is highly recommended on my part. But from here, from time to time, I like to relax a little bit and not really think about much. So Tetris is it for me. And I mean, I recommend it to everybody if you guys want to just relax a little bit. That's what I've been doing. So with that being said, I'll give it over to Karen.
Thanks, Gus. Now, Tetris is a game even I have played. I can't believe it. Doesn't it go back to the 80s? Anyway, I have just a few things to talk about tonight. I finished Women Rowing North by Mary Pipher. I mentioned this maybe a few weeks ago. I mentioned I had started. The subtitle is Navigating Life's Currents and Flourishing as We Age. And this was a recommendation I got from a patron, and I didn't know if I was that interested. I'm glad I finished, though. The Wall Street Journal said the book explores the stereotypes and challenges of getting older and the survival skills women need to be happy. And that was the best one sentence summing up I could find. I mentioned I hesitated to read this. I thought, I don't know, it doesn't sound, how much do I want to read about women in their old age, really? She explained this in the book. Old is a negative term in our society. Doesn't necessarily need to be. The author is a psychologist, and I think I expected this book to be kind of scholarly, heavy thing with a lot of footnotes, but it really wasn't. It's told in a very simple style, short sentences, easy to follow, and she interviewed a lot of women, and she has, I think, composites of them about which she talks in the book. She describes their lives, and that really was interesting, I thought, to read about their experiences. It's almost a philosophical sort of a book that you could pick up from time to time and just read a chapter. I would recommend it to women of any age. Speaking of old things, I want to make a plug for the Ancestry database, which we're allowed to use from home until the end of the year. That's the last I've heard anyway. I end up doing a lot of the obituaries that are requested by people who email us. And we get a lot of contacts from people who don't know where we are. And I got a request from somebody whose relative died in a North Highland, California, I think it was. And I had to explain, we don't have that one in our index. Maybe contact the city near the place the person died. He wrote back and explained a little bit about another one he was looking for. It reminded me of Ancestry again, because all you need is a first name, a last name, and a place this ancestor lived, and you can start looking. And as I told him, I can't really find this person for you, but I did a quick search and I found some variations in the spelling of the first name you gave me. And I don't know enough about this person, but maybe you, as her nephew, would be able to call your local library, ask them to do a search, or have them help you do a search. Until the end of the year, people can try that from home if they're interested. The next book I hope to finish is Cuckoo's Calling by Robert Galbraith, also known as J.K. Rowling. I started it before years ago, didn't finish, so this time I hope to really finish. So that's it for me this week, and next we will hear from Jacki.
Thank you, Karen. So this week I have two books to talk about. The first one is The Falcon Always Wings Twice by Donna Andrews. This is number 27 in the Meg Lanslow series. In the first book, Murder of Peacocks, which came out in 1999, Meg has moved back home. She is a metalsmith. So that kind of sets it up. Her mother's best friends had a son named Michael. So their mothers decided to fix them up, and much to Meg and Michael's surprise, they actually hit it off very well. So in book 27, they've been married for some time, and I know that kind of spoiled it, but it's life. And this is a really wonderful, cozy series. I really enjoy it. But this book, The Falcon Always Wings Twice, is about her grandmother, who has opened a art and craft center to teach this, had decided this summer to do that Monday through Thursday, and Friday, Saturday, and Sundays they would have a Renaissance fair. So they have, the various actors. Meg and her friend Clarke are the blacksmiths, so they do blacksmithing demonstrations. The artists can also sell their wares at vendors. They have various food, and they have the act who are doing, they call it the game. So Queen Cordelia, Meg's grandmother, is choosing her heir. Plot line, this is what we want to lead to. So on this Friday, they want to lead to a sword fight between Sir Michael and Sir George. But the actors basically are improvising their entire thing. The parents end up dead. And so Meg helps solve Terrence's murder. And this is, like I said, it's a really wonderful, cozy series. It's got very eccentric and quirky characters. Small town Virginia. It's a really enjoyable series. And every bird that's mentioned in the title actually appears in the book. So that's kind of a fun thing. Some of her books are on Libby, but this one is not there yet. So it's a brand new book, so maybe it hasn't had time to get out there yet. The second book I want to mention is also a series. This is a book by ILONA Andrews. It's called Emerald Blaze. So the Hidden Legacy series is a urban fantasy where magic appears. About 120 years before the first book in the series, a serum was developed kind of simultaneously throughout the world, where by taking the serum, the people developed magical abilities. But a third of the people actually who took it died. Another third became mad and had to be locked away or taken care of. And the other third developed the magical abilities. And some of those people actually tried to become powerful and taken over. So the powers that be in the various governments decided that they were going to lock away the serum and destroy most of it. The interesting thing happened was that this magical abilities became part of the people's DNA. So when they had children, their children also had magical abilities. So over the time, the magical houses developed for the families, and they became very powerful. Now, this is known in the real world too, because everybody knows that there are people who are magical, and you can actually have somebody develop magical powers after it. So the Baylors, whose father decided to skip out on his mother because she was one of those powerful, evil people who decided she wanted power, and he opened a private detective agency. After he passed away, the oldest daughter, Nevada, tried to run the agency with it. And Nevada happened to be the focus of the first 3 books. And she happens to be a truth seeker. So she can tell if anybody lies. And anybody who is a head of a household is considered a prime because they have the highest powers and everything. But nobody knows about the Baylors because they've been hidden to protect themselves from their crazy grandmother. So Nevada was the first part of the first 3 books. And through the course of her series books, the Baylor's powers became known to people. So they have created the House of Baylor. When Nevada, who was investigating some various crimes, and a very powerful crime named Mad Rogan, who can destroy everything around them, also was investigating this crime, so he kept using it on it. So there's a romance aspect to this series. So Emerald Blade is about the second daughter, Catalina, who is, for want of a better word, a siren. She can make anybody fall in love with her. They become obsessed and basically want to destroy her to keep her. So it's a very powerful magic that she has. She has been designated as a deputy warden for the magic community. So normal police will start to investigate something, but if they feel that it is a house situation, a magical house, then the magical police develop it. Nobody knows that Catalina is a deputy warden. She's kept it hidden. So she has been hired because a very powerful mag has been murdered in a construction site that 4 other families are also involved with. Well, his father has hired a Sauro, who is a very powerful prime from Italy. And he and Catalina have a sort of romance going on, but she knows nothing can come of it. It's solving, the crime as a PI, but it's also dealing with all these different magical events that are happening. And her power-hungry grandmother, who is in prison, is still involved with the family somewhat. So it's a very interesting series. And if you've never read anything in urban fantasy, you may want to try something, because this series has it all. It has a mystery with a private investigator. It has a romance, and it also has the whole magic stuff. So that is what I have been reading. And I actually checked this out from Libby. We don't have the actual physical book yet, but you can always get it from one of the other CCS libraries. And a lot of the other books are available online too. So I'm going to turn this over to Sarah.
Thanks, Jacki. So this week, I've only finished 1 adult book, which is actually Anxious People that Jacki recommended a couple weeks ago. I really, really enjoyed it, but I won't go into a lot of details since you can listen to our old episode and hear from Jacki about that one. But what I wanted to recommend were looking for read-alikes. So it's something we as librarians do all the time when somebody asks us, I really like this author, what else should I read? But you can just Google an author's name and the term read-alikes, and you'll probably find lists from librarians all over the country. And so one of the reasons I wanted to read the Frederick Bachman book was that I saw him on a list of Leanne Moriarty read-alikes, and she is one of my very favorite authors. So this is a great way to find new to you authors, and also recommend going into their backlist. This Anxious People is brand new, and there's kind of a long wait for it, whether you're looking for our print copy or our digital copy. But his older books, a lot of them are on the shelf. So if you haven't read him already, you can always put his older books on hold and not have to wait nearly as long. The main reason I haven't been reading as much is I can't seem to tear myself away from the news. And so I wanted to recommend first the PBS NewsHour as a good source of news, because one, it's an hour-long broadcast every weeknight and half hour on the weekends. So they're able to go a little more in depth than a lot of the network news, but also because it is freely available online, the whole hour-long episode. You can watch it on the PBS website, on any of their apps, or they even put the whole episode on YouTube to make it very easy for you. And then if you're interested in going more in depth with politics, I wanted to recommend one of my favorite podcasts, which is the Slate Political Gabfest. It's 3 journalists. I think they all used to work for Slate and now work for other places, but still do this podcast. And each week they talk about 3 different topics related to what's happening in politics currently. And they're just 3 really smart people who also seem to be good friends with each other. So there's some humor and some good-natured joking between the 3 of them. And it's a great source of information. With everything going on right now, I really wanted to hear from some smart people and put that on when I was driving home from work on Saturday and learned a lot. So that's all from me this week, and I will pass it on to Catherine.
My first book this week is Death in Her Hands by Ottessa Moshfegh. This book was buzzed to us by the Penguin representative at our Fall Book Buzz, but it's also been getting a lot of attention. Moshfegh is the author of My Year of Rest and Relaxation. This book I liked as well, but it's a very different book, so what I want to say is whether or not you liked that book, you still might want to give this one a try. Our protagonist is Vesta Gull, who is a woman in her early 70s. Her husband has died, and she has moved to a sort of rural area and lives on a former Girl Scout camp. And one day she's out walking her dog in the woods, and she comes to a clearing, and she finds a note on the ground. And the note says, her name was Magda. Nobody will ever know who killed her. It wasn't me. Here is her dead body. But there is no dead body. And you might be thinking, I think I'm going to give up on this weird place and its creepy notes, but that is not what Vesta does. Vesta goes to her public library and she starts researching how to solve a murder. And then she starts making up a list of suspects, and she just can't let this go. And if this sounds like a little weird, like she's going from basically knowing nothing to solving a mystery, the book just gets weirder and weirder. It's not a very long book. It's very entertaining, very funny in a few places. It brings together a lot of different genres in one, so I recommend just reading it and going where it takes you. I like this book a lot. It also thematically has some similarities to a book I liked a lot last year, which was Drive Your Plow Over the Bones of the Dead by Olga Tokarczuk, which is a book that was first written in Polish but came out in English translation last year. It's not the same plot at all, so don't feel like it's going to spoil it for you, but I was really glad to have read both of these books. My other book this week is a poetry collection called Lady of Light by Diane Wachowski. Diane Wachowski has been publishing poetry for about 60 years. I have never read any of it until I picked up this collection, which came out in 2018. It's her newest collection. I liked it a lot. There are a lot of personal, introspective poems. I think my favorite one is about her going to Las Vegas and basically, as someone who doesn't gamble very often, playing poker against a group of men and how they thought of her and her reaction to how they thought of her. I like that one. If you're a music lover, at the end of the book, there is an entire series that she wrote while listening each day to Daniel Barenboim on DVD and then writing a poem about it. And I don't think she included every single poem that she wrote during this exercise, but there's a good selection of them. So that's sort of an added bonus if you're a classical music lover. Those are my 2 books for this week, so I will pass it to Nancy.
Thank you, Catherine. I'm going to talk a little bit about poetry too. Alexander Pushkin is considered by many to be the greatest Russian poet, and he's also considered to be a chronicler of Russian history. One of his most famous poems is about Boris Godunov, the Tsar. He was Tsar at the turn of the 16th, 17th century. Russian poetry, I think, is very beautiful, even though I really can't understand very much Russian, but we do have copies of most of his poems in books in the library. And the reason I went back to look at this Pushkin poem is because I was watching a television series from Russia called Boris Godunov, about namesake of the opera that many of us have heard, Boris Godunov, with a completely different take. It was produced on Russia 1, and there's 17 episodes, and it is a beautiful, lavish production. They had artisans sew all these medieval Russian clothing. There's great shots of Moscow and the Kremlin, lots of discussions of how the Moscow See of the Eastern Orthodox Church developed. But what was very interesting is a completely new take on Goodenough. So the Tsar Boris of Pushkin kills Tsar Ivan IV's son, does all kinds of evil things and terrible things to become and stay Tsar. The Boris Godunov in this recent television production is more of a gentler soul. A lot of his misdeeds are blamed on his wife, but he just really wants to lead Russia and lead Russia well. So I think the truth is somewhere in between, of course. And it's fairly certain now that although Pushkin wrote about it, that Godunov did not kill Ivan IV's youngest son. Nobody knows who did, but it's a really beautiful Russian TV series. It's on Amazon Prime. It's also available on a new resource I discovered called Tubi, TUBI.com, which is a couple commercials. And I enjoyed it. They were not disruptive. There's maybe one commercial for every 45-minute series. But so it's a great thing to watch. And I've always enjoyed, Boris Godunov is one of the most recorded, most played Russian operas. They played at Ravinia. I'm going to bring Ravinia in here somehow. In 1937, they had arias from Ravinia. I don't see in the other parts of the first half of the 20th century a lot of Ravinia performances of this great opera. The music and libretto by Magorsky, who's very well known, Pictures of an Exhibition, Night on Bald Mountain, very avant-garde, forward-thinking Russian composer who is very well liked and easy to understand, I think. So all about Boris Godunov has been my week this week, and rereading Pushkin's poetry, listening to opera of Boris Godunov, and looking at a whole new revision of who was Boris Godunov and how he ruled Russia. And they're all great things that are enjoyable for their art as well. And I will pass it off to William with that. Thank you.
Thank you, Nancy. This weekend, my friends and I did another session of Sentinels of the Multiverse, the video game. Now, this is a digital implementation of a tabletop game I've now invested in 3 times over 2 formats. The reason? There is not currently in the market a tabletop game that does as good a job of giving you the feeling that you are playing a particular hero attempting to deal with a particular threat. For example, in the game we played this Sunday, we were pitted against Baron Blade, a super science villain whose goal is to activate his Terra-Lunar implosion beam, causing the moon to crash into the Earth. To defend the Earth from this fate, we had Legacy, who is a combination of Superman and Captain America with a dash of generational one-for-all a la My Hero Academia. The Scholar, an immortal alchemist themed after the dude from The Big Lebowski. And the Sentinels, a group of weaker heroes who have banded together to fight the threats they could not handle individually. Now, each hero in the game has their own deck that plays differently from each other that fits said hero. Legacy in this game focuses on protecting and boosting his allies. The Scholar is a defensive force that can absorb and redirect massive amounts of damage, and the Sentinels are a Swiss Army knife of abilities based on whichever hero you decide to activate. In addition to being mechanically sound, the game uses the art and flavor text of each card to flesh out details of the world, as if you're actually reading a comic book series. The first time I played this game, we were fighting against Omnitron, who's this kind of AI program run amok, with Legacy, Ra, who's this archaeologist powered by a sun god, and Visionary, the important one here, a psychic a la Jean Grey, who's traveled back in time from an alternate future. During one of Visionary's turns, the card Prophetic Vision came out, which I actually have. I grabbed my collection right here, so you can see it. I don't know if you can see it clearly, but it pictures Legacy here, and then this other costume I didn't recognize, and the text said, "The Legacy I remembered was a much angrier man." And when I questioned the owner as to what was going on, and like, that guy doesn't seem angry at all, he explained that this was actually a reference to an expansion that came out 2 years later from the initial release for Iron Legacy, version of that character from a reality where the murder of his daughter, thereby ending the Legacy line, drove him mad and caused him to become a totalitarian dictator. And from there, I was hooked. Got 37 hero options, 40 villain options, and variants for each one. There are hundreds upon hundreds of combinations in which you can play this game. Now, in addition to the physical version, which I've not had a chance to play in a while, there's a digital version of the game available on Steam, iOS, and Android, with all of them having the ability to cross-play with each other. If you're interested, go to your app store, go to Steam, give it a look. The other thing I've been enjoying is 20,020, The Future of College Football by John Boyes of SB Nation. This is a sequel to the very well-received 17,776, What Will Football Look Like in the Future? A 25-part story of 3 sentient space probes who are watching the humanity of the titular year play a version of football that is adapted for a human race who no longer ages, reproduces, gets injured, or dies. The current iteration has them now looking at that same human race and how they've adapted the idea of collegiate sports into something that is played across the literal face of the country. And you'll have to check it out to see what that means when I'm saying the face and how much, much different that is from how you would imagine today's games going. Now, Boys has done a lot of videos on a variety of subjects, some sports related, some not, with his best work being done in the Pretty Good series, which includes a history of the 1904 Olympic Marathon in St. Louis, full of rat poison and dehydration, an analysis of the television series 24 that attempts to show just how dangerous it was to be Jack Bauer adjacent, how a basketball game between Troy State and DeVry University led to a final score of 253 to 141, and my personal favorite, which I hope is up by the time you see this, but is currently taken down because of DMCA, about the futility of investing emotion and or effort in high-stakes poker. If you have 20 minutes to burn at random, check it out. You can find all of his videos on YouTube. With that, I will pass it along to Lori.
Thanks, William. So I'm reading a book called Once Upon a Time, I Lived on Mars, and it's by a science journalist named Kate Green, and it's a nonfiction book about 4 months that she spent living in a geodesic dome on the slopes of Mauna Loa in Hawaii, pretending that she and 4 other people were on a Mars mission. And the idea is it's like a NASA study to see as best they can how people will actually live when they're on these very long voyages. They're stuck together. How it affects different things. In their case, the particular interest was to see how it affected their appetites, having a very limited amount of food that they could eat for really months and months and months. So it's pretty interesting. It's not very long. And she then talks about how it affected her life after she came out of the geodesic dome. And I recommend it. So that's all I have to say for this year. Gee, it does feel like a year, doesn't it? And it's only Monday. Anyway, so that's my book review, and I'm going to pass it back to Sarah to lead us out.
That's it for today, folks. As always, please remember that we are all here for you. We are available for comments, questions, or concerns that you may have, and you can reach us online through Facebook at facebook.com/HPLibrary, through our Twitter, which is @HPLibrary, or via email at hppla@hplibrary.org. Because the library's hours and services can change suddenly due to COVID, it is best to contact us at hppla@hplibrary.org or via chat on our website before coming to the library. Our music today was Carefree by Kevin MacLeod. You can find more information about this and the titles we mentioned in our show notes below. Okay, everybody, this is us signing off. Until next time, stay safe.